The sun blazed over downtown Chicago, drenching the steel and glass towers in a sharp golden glow. The hum of traffic mixed with the distant rhythm of footsteps and car horns. A city alive and relentless, and cutting through it all. The deep purr of a black luxury sedan as it rolled to a smooth stop in front of the Hale Corporation Tower. The door opened with a crisp click. Richard Hale, a man who carried the confidence of power like a second skin, stepped out. His tailored navy suit caught the sunlight, and his gold watch flashed like a tiny sun on his wrist. One glance at him and anyone could tell. This was a man who never heard the word no. He scrolled through his phone, eyes locked on the rising numbers of his company's stock. Another win, another proof of his brilliance. Around him, assistants and security guards moved in practiced rhythm, clearing his path. But just before he reached the revolving doors, something, or rather someone, broke the pattern. A frail old man sat quietly on the edge of the sidewalk, his back against the building's cold stone. His hair was silver, his hands rough and cracked. A small cardboard sign rested against his knees. Just need a chance. The words were simple, almost too plain to notice. But his eyes held a depth that didn't belong to the streets. Clear, tired, blue eyes, the kind that had seen both hope and heartbreak. For a brief moment, Richard slowed. Something about the man felt familiar, but then his phone buzzed again, dragging him back into his world of numbers and noise. His expression hardened. If he's strong enough to sit here all day, Richard thought coldly, he's strong enough to find a job. He stepped past without a word. Behind him, the old man simply smiled. Not bitterly, not angrily, just softly, as if he had seen this reaction too many times before. Inside, the elevator doors closed. Richard's assistant, Clara, glanced at him. "You've seen that man before, haven't you?" she asked gently. "I see a lot of people," Richard replied, eyes still on his phone. "Most of them don't matter." But as the elevator rose, Clara's reflection in the mirrored wall caught a flicker of doubt on his face. The hours passed like they always did. Meetings, signatures, deals that could shift millions with a handshake. Richard's voice filled boardrooms, commanding respect, fear, and admiration. Yet outside those glass walls, under that same sun, the old man was still there. At lunchtime, a small girl wandered too far from her mother in the crowded plaza. She began to cry, soft at first, then louder. People passed by, annoyed or indifferent, but the old man stood, his back stiff from hours on the concrete, and crouched beside her. "Hey now," he said kindly, his voice gravelly but warm. "No need for tears. Let's find your mom, shall we?" Minutes later, he led the little girl back to her mother, who hugged her in relief. The woman reached for her purse, but the old man shook his head. "No, ma'am. Just keep her safe." Not far away, Clara noticed the scene through the office window. She smiled faintly. Richard didn't. He was too busy closing a deal that would make headlines by morning. As the day stretched into afternoon, the city shimmered in sunlight. The old man sat again, but this time he wasn't begging. He was creating. A small knife glinted between his fingers as he carved something from a block of wood. Each stroke delicate, precise. Slowly, a shape emerged. A bird mid-flight, wings spread, carved so finely it seemed alive. He hummed quietly while he worked, a tune soft enough to be lost in the city's noise. When Richard stepped out later that day, his briefcase in hand, he noticed the man again. The carving caught his eye for a split second. There was undeniable skill there, beauty even. But Richard didn't stop. He had a dinner meeting, investors to impress, a life too full to be interrupted by street art. He moved toward his car, and as he opened the door, he heard the old man's voice for the first time. "You remind me of someone," the man said softly. Long ago, Richard froze. Something about the tone, the gentle familiarity, sent a strange chill through him. He turned his head slightly, but didn't face the man. Instead, he muttered, "I doubt that," and got in. The car pulled away, leaving behind a swirl of dust and sunlight. The old man watched it disappear, then looked down at the wooden bird in his hand. He smiled sadly and whispered, "You've forgotten, haven't you?" Hours later, the city glowed in the warm haze of sunset. In his glass penthouse, Richard sat alone, a glass of wine in hand, the skyline stretching endlessly before him. He flipped through TV channels, news, finance, sports, nothing that mattered. Until something did. He froze. On the screen, a familiar face appeared. Older now, thinner but unmistakable. The same man from the sidewalk. A reporter's voice filled the room. Today, social media has erupted after the discovery of Dr. Alan Brooks, a once-renowned scientist and humanitarian found living on the streets of Chicago. Dr. Brooks, a former mentor to several successful entrepreneurs, including billionaire Richard Hale, vanished years ago following a mysterious corporate scandal. The wine glass slipped from Richard's fingers, shattering on the marble floor. For a long moment, he couldn't move. His chest tightened, breath shallow. The world around him, the city lights, the noise, the endless achievements, suddenly felt hollow. The man he had ignored, the one he thought was just another beggar, was Alan Brooks, his teacher, his mentor, the man who once told him, Greatness means nothing if you forget where you came from. Richard stared at the screen as his reflection merged with Alan's image. Two faces divided by time, pride and choices. And that's when the realization hit him like thunder. He hadn't just ignored a stranger. He'd ignored the man who made him who he was. What he did next would change everything. If you believe that every act of kindness matters, no matter how small, take a second to like this video and share it to remind others of compassion. Morning sunlight spilled across the Chicago skyline, warm and golden, painting every glass tower in shades of fire and gold. But inside Richard Hale's penthouse, that light felt cold. He hadn't slept. His reflection stared back at him from the window. A man who had everything, except peace. The news replayed endlessly in his mind. Renowned scientist found living on the streets. Former mentor of billionaire Richard Hale. His hand trembled as he adjusted his tie. Each knot felt heavier than the last, each breath tighter. The man he'd ignored was the very one who had once believed in him, taught him, saved him. He drove through the city as morning traffic roared around him. The sunlight gleamed off car roofs, the air buzzing with weekday chaos. Yet Richard barely noticed. All he could see was Alan Brooks's face. The same calm blue eyes, now lined with years of quiet suffering. And as he turned the corner toward his office, there he was, sitting in the same spot, on that same stretch of concrete, the world rushing by as if he were invisible. Alan's hands were steady now, finishing a small wooden carving. A bird mid-flight, so perfectly detailed that the feathers looked alive. Richard stopped his car. For a moment he couldn't move. The weight of guilt pressed down hard like a stone in his chest. He stepped out slowly, his polished shoes crunching against the pavement. The sound made Alan glance up, and their eyes met. Time stopped, neither spoke. The city faded into silence, leaving only the distant cry of a seagull and the hum of passing cars. The student had become a king, and the teacher, a man forgotten by the very world he helped build. Finally, Richard walked forward and knelt beside him. The movement startled the few bystanders who had stopped to watch. The millionaire in his flawless suit, kneeling on the dirty sidewalk beside a beggar. His voice trembled as he spoke. "You made me who I am, and I forgot you." Alan's gaze softened. The corners of his lips lifted into the same patient smile Richard remembered from years ago, the one that used to calm him during failed experiments and long nights in the lab. Success, Alan said quietly, has a way of making us forget faces, but life has a way of reminding us what truly matters. For a moment, Richard couldn't find words. His eyes glistened, catching the sunlight. He took a deep breath, reaching into his jacket. "Let me help you, Alan. A house, money, anything you want, it's yours." But Alan shook his head slowly. "I don't want your money, Richard. I only want one thing, to visit the university again. One last time." The request caught Richard off guard. No bitterness, no anger, just longing. Minutes later, Richard's luxury car pulled into the campus where it had all begun. The university grounds glowed beneath the late morning sun. Manicured lawns, sandstone buildings, the laughter of students echoing across the quad. Richard glanced at Alan beside him, his eyes wide, almost childlike. As they walked through the familiar halls, echoes of the past seemed to follow them. Chalk on blackboards. Laughter from old colleagues, the scent of books and old varnish. Students turned to stare, whispers spreading like fire. Someone recognized the man from the TV story. Then another, "Is that Dr. Brooks?" One student whispered. "It's him, the scientist they found living on the streets." A crowd began to gather. Phones came out, but this time not to mock or pity, but to honor. Alan's weathered face lit up, overwhelmed by the sudden recognition. His trembling hands brushed against the door of his old lab. Inside, dust sparkled in sunlight that poured through wide windows. The sight made his eyes well up. The benches, where he'd once taught bright-eyed students. The worn notebooks filled with equations. Even the faint smell of soldering metal and oil. Exactly as he remembered. Richard watched silently, his throat tight. He had walked these halls, too, long ago, desperate for guidance. And Alan had been the one who'd given it freely. And now, standing here, surrounded by a new generation of dreamers, Richard made a choice. He stepped forward and cleared his throat, his voice echoing across the room. "This man," he said, gesturing to Alan, "is the reason any of you know my name. Every success I've ever had began right here, because someone believed in me when no one else did. So today, I'm funding something new, the Brooks Foundation, a research trust in his name, dedicated to supporting inventors and scientists who've been forgotten or overlooked." The room erupted in applause. Alan turned, stunned, his lips parting in disbelief. "Richard, you don't have to—" "I do," Richard interrupted gently, "because I should have done it long ago." As the applause swelled, the sunlight caught the tears on Alan's cheeks. He clutched the wooden bird in his hand, the same carving from the sidewalk, and held it out to Richard. "For you," he said softly, "a reminder that no matter how high you fly, you'll always need something to guide you back home." Richard took it carefully, his eyes fixed on the delicate wings frozen mid-flight. In that moment, the skyscrapers, the luxury, the endless chase for more, none of it mattered. This single act, this reunion in the sunlight, meant more than any fortune he'd ever built. They walked together through the courtyard, sunlight filtering through the trees, the laughter of students surrounding them. Two men, one at the end of his journey, one realizing he'd lost his way, side by side again. But as the camera pulls back, Alan's steps slow. He looks up at the sky, the sunlight warm on his face. Richard turns, concern flashing in his eyes. "Alan, are you all right?" Alan smiles faintly, eyes distant, peaceful, just remembering how bright it used to be. The wooden bird rests in Richard's hand, glowing under the sun, and as he watches his old mentor close his eyes for a moment of silent peace, Richard realizes something that will change him forever. The man he'd tried to forget had just taught him the most important lesson of his life. What would you have done if you were in Richard's place? Tell us in the comments. And remember, kindness costs nothing, but it can change everything.